Thank you, David. You can't get rid of me. I'm back. So, all right. So our next panel, as David mentioned, is on the industry. And so let us bring up our industry professionals. First up, Donald Harris, aka TallGamer. You might guess why. He's an executive producer at FarBridge and also the founder of ATX Game Makers. Welcome, Donald.
So I have a book. I'll talk about that later.
Another book. 2 in one day. This is great. Next up, I've got Avi Mintz, who's a VP and an executive producer at certain Affinity. Welcome up. Take your chair. And last but not least, Kristi Ince, who's the experience design director at Maxis Studios in EA. All right, I'm going to jump right in and I'll try to get through my questions as quick as I can because I know that there will be lots of questions for our industry experts. So Avi and Donald, I'm going to start with a question for both of you. Both of you in your roles have experience with mentoring and onboarding new talent, folks such as our students, perhaps. As the industry moves towards 2030, how do you see the training and development of new game developers evolving? What role will mentorship and onboarding play in shaping the next generation of Texas game devs? Donald?
So I'll start. Through my organization, ATX Game Makers, I get a chance to mentor and work with a lot of UT students and just a lot of young people in general. I think the way that particular pipeline is changing is that it's like Bob had mentioned earlier, it's about getting into the communities and getting into networking. There is more emphasis on the who you know. Not to talk about the harsher times in the industry, but as there is a flood of more people trying to get back into work and things like that, it's definitely about who you know. And so I think it's just really important. It's the first thing I wanted to talk about, like when I came up here, is just the power of networking and choosing the right mentor and this, that, and the other. I think off the top of my head, I just think that's going to be even more important. Obviously, honing your craft, understanding whatever discipline that you choose and having that, performing well. But it's all about the mentorship.
Yeah, I totally agree. I too got my first job by meeting the right person at the right time and then calling in a favor 2 years later. That's how it goes.
I literally had, just a quick story. I literally had one of my mentors pull me into a meeting that I did not belong into. So this is during South by Southwest, and there was a large gaming event going on. And it was the Sony event. And my buddy at the time, he's known as the game attorney. And he walks up and he's like, hey, I'm here to... Yeah, Tom. Yes. Yeah, Tom. I'm going to butcher his last name, Bascula. He's like, hey, I'm on the list. And the guy looks at him and he's like, oh yeah, come on in, Tom. Oh, who's that big tall guy? He's with me, and just pulls me into, and I'm like, and instantly I was on my game. I was like, yo, you, I want to meet with you. I want to meet with you. And it's just like, I'm like taking down names and just building my network. And that's literally how I ended up getting into the industry.
Yeah, thanks, Donald. Avi?
The importance of choosing a good mentor, huh? Yeah. And you went straight for like the hard times in the industry now. Huh? It was like right out of the gate. I love this question. I really do. And thank you, by the way. Thank you for having me. Thanks to all of you for being here. This is awesome. To me, this question means something bigger. It means, I guess, a self-awareness even. And the fact that these programs exist now, which didn't 15 years ago, as you guys talked about in the earlier panel. And the self-awareness being that question even, like, what are my mentorship and what are my onboarding opportunities as I join a team? Nobody asked that 15 years ago, right? It was like, hey, here's a desk, here's the game we're making, more or less, we kind of have it. Here's a Bible, the GDD, right? It's bound, it's been printed, we're making this. And I love that question. I hope all of you will ask that question if you do end up in games. I'll also preface anything else I say in this panel as my experience is mostly AAA. And so a lot of my answer are going to be talking about what we do in AAA, what we have been doing in AAA, what we hopefully will do in AAA, where the big, large teams in our industry will go. And I know that at least for my own experience, my own teams, biggest thing I've led so far is Far Cry 6, 1,000 people. And so it was really important to take a moment and properly onboard folks. And I remember not having those opportunities when I started. I take for granted that some people maybe don't need as much onboarding as others. Think about artists, engineers. You're coming with a vocation, with a skill set. At the end of the day, you can do what you're supposed to do. You don't necessarily need to know the culture of the studio you've joined necessarily to do your job, but it's critical. It's important. It's extremely important. How we work, the values that we have as a team, how we're going to organize ourselves, what processes are we going to use, why are we going to do things this way? So asking all those questions, making sure people are answering them either for you or with you is critical. The idea of mentorship also, there are so many more mentors now in the industry than there were 15 years ago because that's how that works. We've been growing. Again, these programs are self-evident, right? All of you here. There are more mentors. There's more opportunity for you to find someone who can help you, who can introduce you to the right people or teach you something. Hopefully there'll be a lot more people writing books. I'm sorry, I didn't write one today. And yeah, more awareness of what we're doing while we're doing it. I think that's key. So that's where my head goes when I think about that question. That's where I hope all of you will take it. Be a force for change, not just expecting that folks will do that, but make sure that you actually push people like me to do that with you as you join teams.
I also want to add on one more thing too. During the onboarding process, like when you're involved in these large companies, so a team of 1,000 people, my studio is only like 32 people. We'll get there. But like, make sure that, I may bring up mentoring time and time and again. It's super important to me. You still should find a mentor in your new job. You should still find a person that you can go to and say, hey, Avi told me that I got to go do X. I don't know how to do that. You got to have that person on the inside to still help you and still grow within that organization, in that career path. Always be learning. Don't just graduate from here and stop. Always be learning.
Yeah, I totally agree, Avi and Donald. The power of mentorship and also the need to expect that out of our employers as well. So I think sometimes it's just not even thought about. And that's something that as you're even interviewing for a job, you can ask, how will I be mentored in my role? I'm a new upcoming game developer. What are you going to do to help me grow in my role and grow into this community? And if they don't have a good answer, that's an answer, right? You're like, well, you just sit at a desk and you look at the printed out game Bible and that's it.
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. Not anymore. We expect community and mentorship and all these kinds of support as we enter into the industry.
Well, or if they don't have a good answer, but you really want to work there anyway, maybe they're making a really good game. I'm not sure, right? But be a force for change there, right? Find someone and force them to mentor you.
Yeah.
Encourage them.
You will help me. Thank you both. So speaking of paths into the industry, Donald and Kristi, I'm going to direct this at both of you. So both of you have non-traditional paths going into the game industry. Can you describe your personal journey and give some advice to those looking to break in through unconventional routes? Kristi?
Okay. All right, cool. Oh, it's on. Okay. So preface this, my title is Experience Designer, and that covers the umbrella of UX and UI technical implementation at EA. So that will ground you in my journey. 20 years ago, there were not really degree programs for even UX or UI, let alone game design. So my background is in design communication, which was a fancy way of saying graphic design. And I started in advertising and marketing industry for like a hot second, less than a year, 7 months. And I was like, this is not dying, but it was definitely not where people were. And I wanted my work to be accessible to more people. And from there, I moved into the entertainment and media industry in web design, but for television networks. And that eventually took me to the games industry a little over a decade ago. And through that journey, I specialized and learned UX design on the job. You will evolve what you do in your career from the degree that you earn. And the games industry had recognized around that time that they needed more intuitive and usable interfaces. And they had started hiring UX designers in the late 2010s or 2000s. And I would say that like UX design in the games industry has evolved from just interface usability to visual signals and affordances, such as diegetic or spatial or meta interfaces, to even the control schemas and mapping those across multiple platforms. The challenges that I work on day to day, they need to solve and scale at levels I've never had to do in the past. So there's many pathways to get into the games industry. Our educational panel talked about a lot of the degree programs now that help get you prepared and into it. We have internship routes that you can get your foot in the door, and often those turn into full-time positions when you graduate. But there's also specialized roles that many games need that you may not recognize as a doorway in. Do you have an economics degree, for instance? Games are micro worlds with their own economies of different currencies and resources that need to be balanced for supply and demand. So from both paid for sources for revenue generation, but also grind sources that players will just earn throughout gameplay. And we need economist designers to know how to properly balance and tune those economies. Do you have an architecture degree? Game environments are made up of modeled spaces. We need buildings. We need people to design them and model them in Engine, which is not all that dissimilar to modeling them in programs like Revit. And that can be for both background spaces to spaces players will navigate with their characters. So the ability to design those spaces is needed. My husband's in the architecture industry, but I also know a lot of architects that have migrated to the games industry and haven't looked back. They really love it. Some other traditional, like unexpected roles potentially to think about that are also needed. Data analysts. We need to understand how people are using and playing the game so that we can continue to evolve those experiences and keep them engaged and enjoying it. We need project managers. There's a lot of us on a team to be able to coordinate and make sure we deliver on time. We need product managers, people who manage the business of the game and making sure that it's successful. Researchers to understand our audience and make sure that we're educated in building the game that they're looking for. And even composers who help compose the musical score or the audio stings or the dialogue or Simlish that can all accompany and build that complete experience.
Kristi works on The Sims.
I do, by the way. I almost wore the shirt. But
the comment about the economist, I'm reminded of a game that came out that had an in-game economy where you could kill animals and skin them and then sell their pelts. And
EverQuest?
What? Yeah.
EverQuest?
And was it when it first came out, they didn't anticipate that the players would be like rabid for doing this, and they killed all of the animals, and whenever any and they you know what I'm talking about?
I do. That was Ultima. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. And it just a little economist. Just know people like killing stuff. So
min-maxing.
Make more in. That would have been a role that we needed. Thanks, Kristi.
I want to say thank you, Kristi, for like listing out all of the other disciplines in games, because a lot of people will come into this and say, oh, I need to be a programmer. I need to be an artist. All those other roles and disciplines are like very, very much needed in the industry. And all of those roles, there is somebody in the industry right now that can currently teach you how to do that and give you insight on how to properly prepare for an interview. I kind of spoke a little bit about my entry into the games industry. Like if you look at my LinkedIn, it's so weird. It's like quantum computing, sales at Dell, VP at Goldman Sachs. It's weird, goofy stuff until I found out that it's like, I really want to make video games. And what I'm really good at is people management and sales. And so I got into production and business development. And there might be a course or something on business development, I guess, but there's still people that can teach me how to do my role. And I've been doing this for umpteen years. I want to say that it's like the ways in, don't think of them as, man, I just got to submit my resume and just sit back and hope, or don't think about yourself as like trying to pigeonhole yourself into a discipline that you're not enjoying, because you will be doing this for 8 hours a day. So like really, really look at, if you're sitting in here and you're not necessarily a part of one of these visual communication designs or, these different courses, think about it. You can still get in here and doing what you love. So yeah, I think that's super awesome that you listed all of that out.
Yeah, it's making games and designing games is such a multidisciplinary field that it's a great excuse to just side quest real hard and like learn something for fun, and it might be useful in game development. Who knows?
Can I jump in here too?
What?
Can I jump in here too? I'm just sharing some stories. I think it's really great to illustrate all. I love that. I love hearing about those specifics, and I'll just share some from my experience. Speaking of economists, we made Star Wars: The Old Republic. At some point, we had people who were literally looking at the currency and the flow and how much savings people had. And as just one example, at one point we realized everyone had way too much money. And so we introduced this like massive land speeder that was huge and, covered like 10 people and was obviously like, wow, that dude spent a lot of money on that, right? And it cost like 1 million credits. And we watched how everyone's savings slowly depleted, right? There are people looking at these things and genuinely managing them. So it was an actual part of managing that economy. And, looking back on my experience with Far Cry, we had folks who had real passion, I think even backgrounds, maybe even degrees in geology, geography, because the goal was to build believable worlds. And so tools will only take you so far. On some level, you have to understand erosion. You have to understand patterns in, landscapes and how to make this look and feel just, to the human kind of unconscious eye, somewhat realistic. You mentioned architecture. There's so many examples of this. So don't feel limited.
Thanks. So I have a follow-up for you, Avi. So we were talking about non-traditional roles. You entered the game industry in what might be considered at this point a little more traditional in an artist role, but you've now transitioned into a producer role. Can you speak a little bit about why you made that change and the skills needed to make that transition, and where do you see as next steps after that? Yeah.
I think everyone who's been in games long enough has a non-traditional entry point, because there was no such thing as a traditional entry point 15 years ago. It was like you kind of showed up. You're like, so we could talk about that over drinks, though. As far as the shift to production, so I'll say this: if anyone here is considering this, or if you ever go through it and you do shift from, I'll call it a productive vocation, like an engineer or an artist, someone who builds something, an audio designer, someone who can actually be creative and look at their work and say, look, I made that. And you become someone who can't do that anymore. If you have any innate imposter syndrome, like it's going to go to 11. It's going to be really bad, really for a long time. I think more than half of my career, quite frankly, I think I've dealt with this. Like, what am I even doing here? Like, what am I contributing? The answer is a lot. Really genuinely a tremendous amount of I guess, just invisible productivity. And I oftentimes talk about this with my producers. I talk about the need as a producer to be a force multiplier on those around you. And I don't know if this will work in indie, but in large games and a large team, if you can have a 2% impact on 500 people, suddenly you're paying for yourself and then some, right? You're having the contribution that you want to have. And that's really why I joined the industry on some level. It was to be a part of this. It wasn't really to be an artist, even though a real core part of me needs that and has been crying for many years. But really seeing the impact, seeing us all grow together, seeing what we do is huge. And I would say if you're ever planning that shift, definitely keep that in mind. Be ready for it, but then also see the value of it. Don't take more than half your career like I did to really properly internalize your value. And I would say, there's so many examples also. When you say force multiplier, it's a bit of a vague statement, but if you can help teams make good decisions early on in product cycles, for example, you could save people months of work, right? Features that should have been cut before they even started, or ideas that we had that maybe should never have been allowed to breathe. Things that maybe more productively, I guess, things that do deserve to breathe, that would be great, but maybe people aren't having their voices heard, and you can amplify them. Being a producer gives you what I call usually unlimited jurisdiction. It allows you to go toe-to-toe with anybody about anything. You don't need a degree in art to talk about why this might be good for the team. You don't need to really understand the details of what everyone's talking about in terms of their engineering tasks to be able to call out that someone needs help. It really gives you a lot of power if you use it in the right way to help people around you. I think that's the most rewarding part of it. I will say this, as an artist turned producer, the first job I was given was to manage the senior client engineering team on performance and compatibility for PS3 and Xbox 360. It was horrible. I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, how am I going to help all of you? But again, as a good example, I realized, you know what? These folks are sitting at their desks all day long, like horse blinders on, focused on these problems. I can go around, I can get intel, I can bring it to them, right? So there's always a way. There's always a way to really help people around you.
Yeah, I love that the role as a producer to really just help and support the team. I don't know if it's always thought of in that way. You're thought of as maybe the commander sometimes, but it's kind of the opposite. It's like what we talked about with leadership and soft skills in education that the previous panel talked about. Leading a team, guiding a team, working with a team, the communication aspect of working with a team has, I think, we probably would all agree, has become more complex after the pandemic. Teams have gone entirely remote or hybrid or, 3 days on, 2 days off, something like that. And for all of you, how do you approach building and maintaining team communication and collaboration in this new hybrid environment? And do you have some best practices or tools that you could recommend that you see becoming essential to teams in the future?
Yeah. So my studio, the studio that I work with, FarBridge, we went full remote, and we haven't gone back to the office, and it doesn't seem like we have any intentions of going back to the office. And as I mentioned, it's 32 folks, some amazing, amazing folks. We had a good culture going into the pandemic, very responsible, very self-reliant team. Still need producers, and we still have to manage folks and help empower the folks. The things that we are doing internally to help maintain that culture and improve communications is like we've set up. I don't want to call it goofy. Well, we call it coffee hour, right? And so where there is an open Zoom chat. We can all jump in after 2 o'clock after 2 o'clock. And it's just an open room where we can all we don't even necessarily have to talk, but it's just, I know you're there and I can just shoot you a message, or I can say something vocally to you. But it just allows for that continued communication. That's to help the internal culture in communications and keeping people comfortable with each other to speak to each other. As far as client communication, which is, a lot of times where I'm in as a producer, it becomes like, hey, with our clients, we have daily reports that we're now doing instead of just waiting to the end of a sprint, let's say. It's like, oh, hey, at the end of this day, our team did X, Y, and Z. And it can be considered over communication. But in a time where we know we're all remote, our client may be all in one building, so they can communicate very fast, whereas we may not. So it's just like I over communicate as much as I can. I think that's a lot that I see that's changed from my perspective at FarBridge. Other than that, it's just, making time. Since we're all remote, we do make time every quarter to get together as a team. Again, as we're focusing on internal communications as well as external communications, keeping those pathways open, trying to make sure that people, so if you're all stuck in a Slack supported organization, it's like, hey, don't DM as much, right? Because like if I'm DMing with you, you don't get to see the information that I'm giving her. And then it's just like, you feel left out in the dark. So it's like, changing those models of behavior as well. And, I'm sure, the younger generation coming into this world is very, very familiar with that. So, those are the kind of things that we're changing at our studio.
The Zoom coffee break at 2:00, that takes me back. Did anybody else have a Zoom birthday during the pandemic? A little sad birthday. You're like, cheers. I hope that yours are more fun. I think that the communal Zoom coffee break in the afternoon seems pretty nice.
We also have a Street Fighter on Wednesdays, and so that's a thing.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. So an active activity. That's good. Avi?
Sure. Yeah. Just piggybacking that for a second and going back to mentorship, just to call this out, I think one of the challenges shifting to remote is that all communication, and I don't know if this is the right word, but feels very intentional. A lot of what we do is shifting to be more intentional versus this passive kind of, I happened to walk past you, or we all sit together, so we turn around and chat with each other. It doesn't have to be that way. The barrier to entry is just sending someone a message. So I'm not sure that maybe it's just people who started their careers differently. Maybe it'll be different. I'm not sure. But I do feel like it's worth calling out on the mentorship front that kind of passive or unconscious mentorship really takes a hit. And I love things like the 2 p.m. coffee Zoom. I think those are the way to do it, right? Like just everyone's hanging out. You just lower the barrier. Right? You just make it a little bit easier for someone to say, hey, you know what? I was struggling with this thing today. Can someone help me? Or there's this thing I'm thinking about. I love that. That's great. I know a lot of our teams do that too. I would say this overall, like at a high level, I always like to say, and I'm a big person, I'm a person who definitely thinks a lot about process. That's obviously like almost everything I do. And process really is tools. It's what it is at the end of the day. It's a type of tools. And I tend to think about tools as being very dangerous because, aside from power tools and, the obvious where your head might go, tools can often be misused. And specifically as time goes on, tools get better. It's something that just happens, right? Everyone's investing in them, so they'll get better. And if folks don't know how to use them or what they're for, they can take us down really weird paths. And I think, maybe all of you haven't experienced this yet, but being in stand-ups and you're like, why am I here? What is the value of this to me? And that's just one small example, right? Like, why are we doing things this way? Why are there 30 people in this call? There's so many examples of taking a process or a tool and misusing it. Zoom, meetings, Jira, Slack, like all these things are super powerful. They're awesome. They can do so much for us. And I think what would be important, and even dialing my answer all the way back to the beginning of this with where the industry is going and the maturation of our industry, I hope that there'll be more intentionality with everything we do. And I hope that when we think about the tools and we think about using those tools, we'll all ask ourselves, why are we doing it this way? What problem are we solving? And I'll just talk about some specifics for a moment because vagueness is the enemy of actual real takeaways. Talking about GDDs, talking about a printed binder. Well, why did we do it then? And why don't we do it anymore? And what's happened? How do Google Docs slot into our actual process, right? And to talk about that for a moment, when we have 5 people trying to make a game together, well, it makes sense that you'd contribute, you'd build one document together, you all work off of that. That's straightforward. That's just you putting your thoughts down. That's what probably, what anyone would have done before a speech or any other stint. I remember GDC a few years back, I got to hear Sid Meier talk about making Civilization. And it was like him at his desk for 6 months. That's it. That was the team. He had some philosophical arguments with other people, but it was him. He made the whole thing. And a GDD might be great for that, right? But Google Docs is huge now because now suddenly we've got hundreds of people collaborating on something. But that can also become a real problem when you have hundreds of people collaborating on something, right? I love the idea of taking things out of DMs, but then also what happens when you have hundreds of channels and you've got hundreds of people interacting in those channels? How do you structure Slack so that everyone can have the right information that they need and not the entirety of all of the information, right? That's not helpful. And then at some point they'll just shut all that down and they'll go back to just sitting and not paying attention anymore, right? So it's totally a plug for how producers can help you all, or how you can all help everyone as producers. But yeah, I think that it'll be important moving forward as tools get more and more powerful, which they're obviously doing, and it feels almost at a breakneck speed. It'll be really important to ask, what is this tool doing for us? what principle, is this solving? What problem do I have that this can help me get over, right? Is my team getting the right information? Do they all have what they need to succeed? Are we effectively communicating? Is there some way we could be doing this faster, or are we doing this too fast? There's so much that you can be asking, and just maybe, I guess, boil it down to why. Just ask why often, ask why a lot, and read Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, if you haven't yet.
Yeah, I love that answer of just taking a minute to question what's the purpose of us doing. Like, do we have to upgrade, or is it just shiny? Thank you. Kristi.
Yes, I feel like we all had the same journey in different places. So I think same. A lot of what we did when COVID hit was just replicate every literal interaction that I had with a human with online tools. And like y'all spoke to, it was like this overflow of information, and some things were happening in silos, some things were happening in public spaces. And so we actually eventually hired an external consultant to teach us about remote best practices, and got intentional with our communication standards, and outlined where it's transparency of information, making sure it's accessible in a space for anyone to discover, and in some ways may feel like over communication, but being intentional about where you share was really important. And so we always try to model those behaviors, even from how we hold meetings and putting a 5-minute buffer on the 30-minute block so that people can have a bio break. Because rolling from one continuous meeting into the next, you are trapped at your desk and you're like, I haven't had a drink in 3 hours. So it's human thinking there. I would say on the other side, we had very few cloud-based tools before the pandemic, and it was a race to figure out how to replace those in a way to make them collaborative by default. So, Miro was mentioned earlier. I love Miro. It's so great. We use it for probably too many things, but it's a fantastic tool. Google Drive, of course, in my profession, Figma is the gold standard for experience design. Using programs like Coda as well. I want to replace Confluence with it, but no one else is listening to me. I know, no, it will never replace Confluence. We use, Atlassian, Zoom, Slack. Like we try to use all of these tools that keep us in a live synchronous space, while still trying to be asynchronous by default and not always jumping specifically to, let's get on a Zoom meeting, because there's a emotional tax to being on call and on camera and smiling for 10 hours straight.
Yeah, that Zoom fatigue, it hits hard.
I also want to bring up something, a point that I've just observed and kind of want to bring it up to the surface, is that, all three of us have said, like, hey, we're doing all of this change. And, we're talking about these tools that we used to use and that we're not using the same way. You gave me some PTSD when you started bringing up Google Drive, because like we just recently did an audit, and like I had so much stuff that I shouldn't have had, or should have been shared out, this, that, and the other. And I want to point that out to y'all, is that like when you join these big organizations like EA and LucasArts or whoever, and FarBridge, we're still trying to figure it out. We're evolving, we're changing. Like this whole thing is talking about, game dev in 2030. We are changing. So some of the things that you're learning now, be cautious when you're getting into these roles. That may not be exactly how you think it is. So be a little bit flexible when you're going in here, and be ready to learn these new methods. And it changes from studio to studio to studio, right? So just keep it flexible.
Always learning. Always learning.
Yeah, always learning. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. So that is the end of my questions. We're going to roll into audience questions again. Do you still have a microphone? You're going to take mine. Okay. All right. Oh, we got one.
Thank you.
So if anyone in the audience has a question, raise your hand. Here, we got one.
Hello, I'm Christian. I'm a fourth-year AET major. Earlier, we were talking a little bit about generalized versus specialized skill sets, especially when we're in interdisciplinary programs such as AET. And, over my years here, I've done everything from art, design, engineering. I've worked with physical spaces and digital spaces. And so when you're working on these teams, I'm wondering if there's what role somebody with a more generalized design and skill set or mindset and skill set would have.
I'll go ahead. I'll start. I love that you brought that up again. We were just saying I would have loved to have a microphone when it was asked last time. There's so much we could talk about how that plays out in large teams and small teams. I'll work back. I'll tell a few different contexts. I'll share a few different contexts. So currently at certain Affinity, we are a co-developer primarily. We make our own games as well, but we do a lot of our work historically. A big portion of our work has been for external larger clients, and the flexibility that requires for everyone that's at certain Affinity means that we've actually even made it a rule in hiring that unless we have a very clear reason to hire a specialist, we will hire what we call T-shaped developers. We like it. We almost require it. That most of our developers have some flexibility. They're not just, a model artist, right? They're someone with some technical aptitude. They're an animator who can also do a lot of previs. Like there's a lot of benefit. And I found in my career personally, over the past 15 years, there's always been benefit to people who can be flexible and who can do multiple things. Sometimes they don't even flex that muscle. Sometimes it's just the knowledge that it brings. I didn't mention it earlier, but as an artist stepping into a producer role, one of the nice things about that is that I know how artists work. And so even if I don't necessarily know how artists work today, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all still doing the same more or less things that we were 15 years ago. There are still models, there's still, UVs, there's still textures, there's still a normal map. Like I know roughly how this works. I can help teams get ahead of problems. And when you think about that in the context of a developer, they can make suggestions sometimes, or they can help their teams in ways that they wouldn't if they were really, pigeonholed into one role. I've also seen people who've taken specialization to a point where they are almost becoming the cornerstone of the large, massive AAA game that they're contributing to. I'll rewind all the way back to like Splinter Cell Blacklist. Huge part of that was animation, like huge part of that, killing in motion, and the idea that you'd mark and execute. I don't know if anyone here played Splinter Cell Blacklist, but that was a big part of the public identity of the game. And here's a better example. Think about Assassin's Creed and climbing, procedural climbing, right? Like that system defined a big portion, free running, climbing, all of that. The technical animators that built that almost drove really the success of those games. So I think there's clearly room for both paths. I don't think that one necessarily would be better than the other. I think it's more about you. Who are you? What do you want to do? Do you want to focus and do something like that? Do you want to be more specialized and have your hand in all the pots?
Yeah, total +1. And I would say you can go to a smaller studio and then utilize the breadth of skills that you have and be involved across the swath. But if you are interested in like specializing, you found an area that you're just more passionate about maybe than the other skills, going to a large organization where you can really specialize and grow, but still be flexible. We are often stretching into other roles just to deliver the final product. The worst thing that can happen in development is everyone's like, this thing should happen. Are you going to do it? Like everyone's looking at everyone else to figure out who's going to pick it up. And so it's the people that can push a little further and just do that task without even being asked at times. And you're just like, thank you. I didn't want to, as a leader, have to track somebody down to be like, could you please pick up that task?
Yeah, and I'll even chime in here. So there is specific instances in the studio that I work with is that there is this one, I guess I'll call her a junior producer. She's a really great producer, really amazing person. But she just started throwing out code one day, and I'm like, I didn't know. Well, hey, let me put some more tasks on you on this code. As a producer, for me, it helps me to know that like I have someone who is multidisciplined, and I can just lean on to get that extra little squeeze or help make this deadline. So I think smaller studio, definitely you'll find those opportunities bigger. More often in the smaller studios. But yeah, I think that's awesome.
I'll take something both of you said and just add on a little bit more, which is that there's this idea, I think, just talking to some people who've joined big teams, and this idea that, big teams kind of have all their, shit together, right? And like there's 100 people here. Surely all the bases are covered. It's never true. And not only is it never true, but it's oftentimes less true than smaller teams, because in smaller teams, there's no obfuscation, right? It's like there are 4 of you. If someone didn't do that, everyone knows you didn't do it. If there are 100 of you, it's like, well, who is supposed to do this, right? So there's tremendous opportunities in both scales. And I think also looking at it from a project cycle standpoint, at the end of production, fewer unknowns, maybe even on a bigger game, a beginning of production, no matter how big that game is, you might want some people who can do everything and keep it nice and tight and just try to build something.
Also, oh man, in pre-production, a person like you would be super, super valuable, right? Because it's like, I can just toss this idea to you. You can do a little bit of each piece. And I'm like, yeah, we should do that. Good stuff.
Thank you. Any other questions? I saw one hand in the back corner. I believe we have 12 minutes. Is that correct, David?
Yes, if we want to go 5 minutes over,
Give or take 12 minutes.
Hi, I'm Alani, and I'm a second-year AET major. So my question for all of you is, when you first came out of college and didn't have much experience yet, if you could do one thing differently, what would it be?
That's a tough one.
I'm a thinker, so I don't know if this will apply to everybody else. I'm an overthinker, to be clear. And so I would have tried to do more. You guys mentioned networking. I would have tried to get out there more. I would try to meet as many people as possible. I wouldn't have let myself stop myself. I wouldn't let me stop myself from getting out there and just finding more. And I think it's really hard now, but if I think back to who I was then and what was actually going through my head, I think I had some really rigid ideas, shockingly, about, you think I'd get more rigid with time, but I don't think that's happened. I had really rigid ideas about what it would mean to break into the industry and how I would do it and what role I would fill and what I would do. And I think if I'd go back in time, I'd just tell myself, chill, like just go talk to some people, find a path, maybe one that you don't even know exists yet. Maybe one that you can't comprehend, right? Just go out there, meet people, try to do things. Game jams were amazing. I did not do enough game jams. I could tell stories about game jams.
You helped me think of something. So again, like when I was making the point that, when you listed all of the different disciplines, getting out and speaking to people and learning all of the different opportunities that you can get into. So I sat and waited a while as a salesperson for a large computer company, won't mention the name, and I really wasn't happy. And I was like, there's no way, I'm not a programmer, I don't know. They said, no, there's plenty of sales positions in the world of games that I could have joined much, much earlier. So just learn more about the industry, learn more about ways into the industry, and just do it. Just try it. Just go and do it.
You also gave me inspiration. So not to scare anyone, but that first job is probably the hardest one to acquire. Getting out of school and into a professional role, any role, was so much substantially harder than I expected it to be. And so I think the thing I would have changed was, what I did right was I wasn't waiting for the perfect role. I just took a role that was close to what I was interested in, because that builds your network. My second job that got me into the entertainment and media industry was through my husband's network. And it was somebody who was working at Scripps Networks on HGTV. And I was like, oh my gosh, I would love to work at that company. And it ended up that I transferred over. So the networking is huge. But what I would advise myself was probably do internships, network more, but getting in and building that skill set to build even a portfolio of case studies. I had a physical one that I carried around with me. I should have done more, I think, was really the thing. I was just expecting I would walk into an interview and I would get an offer, because that happens. That first interview just translates into an offer. So yeah, the practice, getting out there and doing everything that you can, even while still in school, to build that network and get experience.
And I'll say one more thing, and I need to mention it. Gordon just reminded me I haven't talked about it too much. So the whole networking piece, and I've said it again, networking, mentorship, all of that stuff. ATX Game Makers, the thing that I also run outside of FarBridge, is we got about 1,100 people. It's a local community, ATX Game Makers, Austin, Texas. That's my creativity. But, you know, there's plenty of professionals and folks like yourselves who are looking to get into the industry. You can come here and find a mentor. And so this book is not a book on mentorship, but this book is something that we publish every year. Any member can create their own page in this book for free. And then when I'm traveling and I give it out to my professional friends who are hiring, this is also one of those networking events or networking opportunities that you get without even being here. So yeah, I'm gonna give both of y'all some books so when you guys are hiring, you know, and there's UT students already in here. So I've actually hired some folks from here. So yeah.
All right.
Actually, the refresh team is in that book. So
That is true.
Hello, my name is Keegan. This is my first semester here at UT Austin, but this is like my senior semester in total. A question that I have is related to portfolios. Something I've always worried about is the quality of my work. I do drawings on like whiteboards and I've done animations and like old software and stuff, and it's good and people do like them, but I always worry and I'm conscientious about whether employers would like it or think it's any good. I wanted to know your opinions on the importance of a portfolio, the importance of the quality of it, or whether it's more about the ideas and the thought process that went into it.
So yeah, I definitely want to jump out because, so I'm going to tell you a name that you need to go to LinkedIn and go right now. You got your phone, look up John Henderson. So John Henderson is the man about town. He knows everybody and their mom. And he often holds a thing called a portfolio posse review. Portfolios are extremely important. It gives me a whole bunch of information about you before I even know how to pronounce your name. John Henderson and oh my gosh, Alan Utoff will also help with resume reviews. So, you know, this question also goes into like getting a good resume together. But you can answer that question by going and taking your portfolio to people to have it reviewed. And again, also, this is also the whole networking and mentoring piece. If you go and you find someone who's an artist who, you know, is working at an awesome studio, you can get that artist to look at your portfolio. So if you're at an event, you know, but yeah, so definitely, yeah, that's my direct answer to you.
can I just say real quick, the next portfolio posse is Saturday, October 19th at Game Worlds in Anderson Square. And if you contact me, I will make sure that you all have an email invitation that John sent me to share with you all. So
I love that advice. Yeah, don't ask us, ask real artists. For you personally, I think that's the best answer. But as a global answer, I would say this. I think that I'm not sure what everyone knows about what the concept art discipline is in AAA games, but I would argue that it's more about ideas than it is about illustration. And I would argue that it's more about ideas and illustration even more now than it was 10 years ago because tools are making it easier and easier to pump out great work. Again, much like we were talking about earlier, right? As tools get better, it's going to become even easier. That like just think about how amazing Photoshop is, you know, compared to what I did in school, right? There's no question. So the quality of illustration can be its own thing. And when we think about marketing pieces and you think about trying to make real inspiring art, maybe there's something there, but there's just as much of a place for, and I remember even giving feedback to concept artists in my career many, many times, like, hey, you're being too fine artsy about this. I just want a collage, like get a great idea, throw a bunch of stuff in, give it a paint over. It's really about the idea and it's really about exposure to multiple different ideas. Read history books, go to museums, all that, right? So if you're, I don't know, I haven't seen your portfolio, but if it's about ideas, if that's what you bring to the table, just keep in mind the role of concept art, especially in large organizations. Like how many times people have asked the same question, which is, how can I get something fundamentally unique for this game that no one else has seen before, right? Everyone's looking for that all the time. I want a unique visual that will be memorable that no one's seen before. And that's a bit of a crazy thing to ask for, and yet everyone's asking for it all the time. I remember we made demons in Shangri-La and Far Cry 4, and that was the kickoff prompt, and it was months and months and months of idea generation. It was not illustrations. Far Cry 6 was, you want this look for the guerrilla movement that's like found objects, and it was ridiculous, but like, what's that look going to be? I'm not sure that we succeeded, but again, ideas. So really, it's critical.
The only thing I'd add is show a range of styles. Show that you're not just one type of style, because that could limit the opportunities where they're like, they might think that style doesn't match with the product they're making, and thus it's a door closed. So the more style range you can showcase, the more opportunities that will open up for you.
And I might add one thing. So one of the things that we teach in AT when we're building portfolios is to not only show the final product of what you've created, the final version, but also the process that you took to get there. And we teach that for a few reasons. One of which is to show how you can tackle problems when they arise, and also to show how you collaborate with others. This is a very team-based industry. And so I wonder if that is also your experience in reviewing portfolios. Do you look for just the final quality of the art, or do you look for how that person is as like along the way?
On the UX side and experience design, the process, I have to see the case study. If I only see the final output, I have lots of questions, because at times I also wonder, were you working alone on this? Were you working in a group? Which parts were actually your contribution? And understanding how you break down the problems and you think about things, let me know how you're going to show up in a group collaborative environment. As we discussed earlier and in the previous panel, it is highly unlikely that you will be doing any work alone. So the ability to show how you will work with a team is critical. It shows me the skill sets that you know, and where I might need to mentor and grow that new hire in the position that we have.
I'll just say both. I talked a lot about concept art and idea generation, so I'll just say on the other side, there's also high fidelity, right? If someone's applying for a character art position and I know what I need, the output might be the most important thing, right? So it really depends on what we're looking for and what the job is. Modelers, texture artists, like tech artists, the output might be, you might be able to tell us 1,000 things by giving us one screenshot or sending us one video.
I think we've got time for maybe one more. I saw a hand in the second row. Or third row. Okay.
Hi, I'm Rhiannon. I'm a third year in AET. I also work as a mentor for high school students to help them get into creative industries, including game design, at E4 Youth. That's the organization. And I was wondering, and this is for them too, how do you approach networking if you have awful social anxiety? You have no idea how to talk to people and it just scares the crap out of you. How would you approach something like that?
I know it might be weird because I'm sitting up here, but I have terrible social anxiety. I have never been good at that. I don't know. I think you just walk up to people and you just talk to them. You just push through.
Okay.
I'll say this. I'm very outgoing. I love to be up on stage, so I love this. But my girlfriend, who is very much an introvert and has a lot of social anxiety, pointed out to me the power of the Discord channel that I run. And so it's like, find those communities that are online. It's a lot easier for those folks who are more introverted to communicate that way. So, there's, I wouldn't suggest, I love Game Dev Night, but I wouldn't suggest that as a productive place for them. I would say, find an online community.
Okay.
I think there's also power in showing up and being like, I'm scared to talk to you, but I just would love to hear your thought. Just telling them that you're a little freaked out is charming. I would talk to you.
Yeah, actually, and you know what? That's another thing that actually happened once. I had a gentleman that I was mentoring, and I can't remember the person we were approaching, but apparently they were a part of BioWare, and he just got visibly nervous. His hands started sweating. He's like, dude, I can't. I was like, I will go with you. So finding a good mentor who will take your hand, basically, like that happened to me, and say, hey, let's go together and talk to this person. So, if you are going down this path of mentorship, get familiar with the different personalities and the ways to help and aid them into networking.
And on that note, one more question.
Well, it's not a question. This is actually about this topic very much. So I once required students to go to networking events, and I had a student who was so introverted. You can't, I'm sorry. I used to require students to go to networking events, and I had one student go, and they were so introverted, they were so afraid to talk to people that they brought their significant other and had their significant other talk to everybody, and they just stood there silently. And then a bunch of people contacted me after that event saying, what was going on there? And so it's the repetition, going a lot. One of the things, there's a great book called Quiet, The Secret Life of Introverts, and it talks about the psychology of things. So, and what Professor Jessie said, going to these events repeatedly, you'll become more familiar with the faces. You get more relaxed. You combine with going with friends that can go, and I sometimes will introduce people to other people. Here's the thing you always should know about a networking event. If someone doesn't want to talk to you, there's something wrong with them. They're at a networking event, okay? So it's the type of thing you'll eventually get to a point like me where you just stop caring about what people think about you when you go to these things, but it's not easy and it's terrifying. But the more you do it, it gets easier. The more you do anything, it gets easier, so.